welcome to Night Clerk Radio, episode 92. We're now solidly in the middle of spooky month. We are doing Horrorsynth for Halloween.
Yay.
So getting into Darksynth, Horrorsynth, I guess, for this episode. Which has been interesting because it's a genre I don't really know a lot about. And this isn't like a criticism, but it's maybe a little unfair. I always feel a little unfair. But it's one of those genres that's sort of like lo-fi hip hop to me, where it like only exists as YouTube compilations. I don't really think about people making it, which is terrible.
Yeah.
Because they do, but it's one that I don't like seek out in the same way. So I only am exposed to it through like compilations, like my roommate and his friend like work out to Darksynth all the time. Like that's their gym music. So I kind of hear it from the basement in passing. Yeah. And it makes sense, but I didn't really appreciate like the range of influences and stuff. So I thought this was a very educational episode for me.
Yeah. Darksynth, horror wave or dark wave. Like there's obviously like
Horrorsynth.
Yeah. There's so
however
many
you want to tag it. Yeah.
It's synth wave that is supposed to be spooky in some way. Like, the joke I've been making to myself, at least, has been Darksynth. Sure, we got both kinds, John Carpenter and heavy metal. Like that's kind of how it seems. Like I've been listening to it for a while, mostly through YouTube compilations as well. But like it would be something I would put on every once in a while. There does seem to be two influences, like John Carpenter style 80s horror movie soundtracks. Like, and I would see a lot of that back. Like I think Darksynth really took off like mid 2010s, probably. I would guess with the popularity of Stranger Things, right? Like
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And synthwave was just really popping in the 2010s. Like there's one artist I like called Dance with the Dead. If you look at their 2016 album, the shape is synth, John Carpenter influence, it sounds, but like their newest album is called Driven to Madness, and it's got a ton of heavy metal. So like there's been this interesting transition in the last couple of years. Darksynth going from more 80s synth influence to heavy metal influence, or whatever type of metal you want to call it, like, speed metal or whatever. And I don't know why that is, but like I've been noticing a lot of synthwave artists incorporating more and more metal and stuff like Perturbator and just in general.
Perturbator, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a reductive hypothesis for that, but it's probably not fair to the full range of influences that these artists bring in. But a lot of it feels very post-Doom 2016.
Oh.
Like Mick Gordon.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
But it's interesting about your comment on the timing, because just out of curiosity, I just did the quick Google trends on Darksynth, and there's like the most activity is actually like around 2004, 2005.
Okay. Huh.
And then, but there's more like steady, consistent, low level activity now, which probably is largely also just that everything's more diffuse, right? Like everything's more and more niche. So just in general, it's more consistently popular, but at a much lower level. There's like a big spike in December 2020, 2000 or November, December 2004. That's interesting.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Again, the purpose of this podcast is that we're just sort of like casual observing things. Like we're not. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the 2010s certainly mashes up with when I started to become aware of it, but that's also like a personal bias, and probably getting back into electronic music through like vaporwave and chillwave, which is not really the same, but then you kind of become aware, or all these other things end up in your algorithm. So there's like an observation recency bias. You're like, oh, I'm starting to see more and more of this because you're consuming more and more related stuff. But I don't know what that would be referencing. If you out there know why there's a huge Darksynth thing, was there like a comic book character called Darksynth that killed Superman? No, that wasn't it. These are good questions.
Yeah.
But there's definitely one in like 2015 around Stranger Things.
I do remember I watched the documentary, I think it's called The Rise of Synthwave, which is, about that. And they talk about like the early 2000 scenes being pivotal to the development of the genre. So, but yeah, I wonder if like the 2004 Darksynth is the same Darksynth that we would think of today, or if it was just like a slightly different type of music that,
For sure.
Yeah. Very interesting.
I definitely do think, though, agree, like Mega Drive and Carpenter Brute and Perturbator and stuff is like early 2010s when they started to become much more aware.
There's
so I think that timing is still correct.
Yeah, there's that sort of like Hotline Miami and then Stranger Things, like really made like, and then you started seeing things like Far Cry, Blood Dragon, and you know that became a whole thing, and like that's when it really like reached the stratosphere for a niche, previously very niche genre, and yeah, it's been kind of riding that ever since.
I do get the appeal of it because I always think of synthwave /outrun as being more like upbeat and optimistic, and I think the dark and Darksynth for me really comes from being more dystopian, or like a less optimistic, more or darker, to reuse the word, of course. It just feels more destructive and primal, kind of how I thought of it, especially your album.
Yeah.
Than like, oh, we're feeling good. It's summer in my 1987 Mustang cruising down the 405 or whatever. It doesn't really capture that mood.
Yeah.
But it works great for Halloween.
Yeah. Again, this all goes back to like the 80s when, cheap synthesized music was really popular in horror movies and kind of created this like link that stands to this day. And that was a sample from Cthulhu by Dralian. This was track 3, Eldritch Horror Machine, featuring Fixions. I hope I pronounced that right. And yeah, this is, again, like the very metal influenced version of Darksynth. Like Dralian is a French artist who works primarily in heavy metal. So this is obviously Cthulhu is the Lovecraftian great old one from Lovecraft Story, who has been a popular character in music. There's probably a couple hundred albums called Cthulhu or have Cthulhu in the title. Actually, 8 Tower Records just put out an album called the Necronomicon Pages. So, I just got a couple of Bandcamp emails about it. And this is a interesting album because it's like called not only a dark synth album, but a metal synth album. So like that's another subgenre of like metal and synth put together. They just fit like peanut butter and chocolate. And this is a very fast, brutal album, very, very heavy on the metal, but also like there's quite a bit of synth work in here, as you can hear. Like this track was really kind of like a chasing, like an outrun kind of track, very fast, very energetic, relentless. And this would be great workout music.
Yeah. And I was very surprised because this album is so much more metal influenced. And I think that's sort of where my McGordon comment came from of like, I think for better or worse, every so often, like people come by and produce either something that's extremely popular or extremely iconic and their name kind of gets attached to stuff for better or worse. So that's like the name that pops in my head, like kind of post for some of this post 2016, like synth metal stuff. But I think this has way more interesting like synth influences throughout. Whereas Doom, I think, is more of like straight metal, which is not quite fair because there's a lot of synth work in Doom, I guess, but they still are very distinct.
Yeah.
I think more of it as like driving the popularity, not necessarily like the styling or the sound exactly. The other thing that was on my mind is an influence, again, like a bit of a recency thing because they're doing a kind of tour. And I think it's supported by some new episodes or maybe a new like longer episode, but Metalocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
Like that kind of death metal pastiche, which that sort of commentary on a genre, which I'm not saying that this album is doing. I think this is not like having fun with metal. This is like what they want to make. But at first that was my thought is like, oh, is this like their other stuff? Is this, they normally produce Darksynth, which I listened to some of their other albums and tracks, and it's like 50-50 whether or not it's like really synth heavy or more like this, which is like metal guitar drums driven.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if this is like playing around with metal, then it reminds me a little bit of that, just because to do that kind of not mockery, but to like engage with something sort of comedically, but seriously, which like Metalocalypse does. Like clearly Brandon Small, who does that, loves that genre of music and loves those bands. And it knows exactly like what to poke at without being outright mockery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like a sincerity behind it. The same way with like another Halloween reference, like Dark Place. Like I think Dark Place comes out of like, part of me thinks they have to actually like Stephen King and that type of stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, it's not mockery, but it is having fun with a concept. And I think of that type of media with this, but this is more serious, which is why I'm not making a direct comparison, but that was like my first thought. I listened to some other stuff and some of it's like this and some of it's not. I was like, oh, okay, this is just this blended genres, which is pretty interesting. And this type of music, like very primal and aggressive, and it kind of knows exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And executes on it really well. In terms of highest praise, it has like the same effect on my brain as a movie like Commando or something.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just like, it's fun. Like it's a bunch of people having fun making exactly what they want to make.
Yeah.
And you can just enjoy it. I totally get why someone would love this, like either in like a workout situation or driving, or maybe just, I personally wouldn't like just chill and throw it on.
Yeah, no, it's not chilling music.
But in context for what it is, it works really well. Like I did one of my passive listens while playing a bunch of BattleBit Theater with Caleb, which is pretty sure popping up favorite her, but it's like a Battlefield clone, but like Minecraft graphics. It's kind of silly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I had a lot of fun with this just blaring in the background, just running around trying to shoot people and not get shot.
Yeah,
like,
this is perfect music for that. Yeah, like there's the synthwave kind of like outrun tracks are really good for that. Like it's very like, again, this frenetic energy to it. Yeah, I think the key, I 100% agree. Like things like Dark Place and Metalocalypse and this are made by fans who love the genre, and I think the key word here is exaggeration. Like they know the exact elements they love in that genre, and then they create a work that just exaggerates it to the point of to an outsider ridiculousness, but to them it's like, you know, you're a baker and you love donuts and you love sprinkles, so you just like when you make sprinkled donuts, you're just, I'm gonna fucking absolutely coat this motherfucker. You make so many goddamn sprinkles, and you know it's bad for you. You know it's not balanced, but you love the sprinkles. You don't care what anyone else. This is for you. And like, yeah, I think that's the place it comes from. I didn't think about it in that way, but like that makes so much sense.
Yeah, I think that's true of like really good fusion is like you take all the stuff you like about it and you're very good at distilling it down to like the absolute core elements you love, taking a bunch of those, and then they kind of all amplify each other. And I think that's definitely true of the metal and the synth working together in this. One thing that's interesting is I'd love to know how much of it is played versus programmed. Like I didn't see artist credits. So,
I mean, he did get some collaborators for this.
Yeah, but I didn't see in the credits like drums by so-and-so, guitar by so-and-so. So I'm not sure exactly who did what, but I think that's like one of the better aspects of the synth inclusion is that a lot of stuff is like very precise, very fast, very just aggressive video game music, like, which I think makes sense because I think on Dav's Wikipedia, I think this project started out of doing an indie game horror soundtrack.
Oh,
not
really?
the specific album, but like the artist moniker overall.
Oh, yeah, because this is a side project from.
Yeah, so like clearly, you know, video games as an influence.
Yeah, they're again like these synth heavy things are, I think, very video game influenced. But like the thing I really liked is, you know, it seems to alternate between like metal versus synth heavy tracks. Yep. And I like that. So he clearly enjoys both. A lot of the tracks have really cool openings, intros and outros where they really like build in this kind of like things like in track 5, the Necronomicon Witchcraft. Necronomicon, you know, has this very heavy string opening, very tense, almost like, and then it just really lets up. I think my favorite track though is track 6, The Frozen Lake, because that has the most like, has these interesting symphonic elements. So why don't we play a bit of that? It's really interesting. Like the thing, like, the core of the album is, shredding guitar, electric guitar and like outrun synth. But like the things he adds in, like there's a lot of the, like I mentioned, the strings, a lot of interesting sound effects, little openings. I think like on track 10, it sounds almost like Outer Gods, Exodus. Like there's a sitar in it, I think, something like that. Like,
ooh, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And a little piano in there, and then it gets fucking wild.
Yeah, like later tracks have some piano and stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. And even like the last track actually is Cthulhu, I think is a really good summation of the entire album. It sort of incorporates everything into one like big, long, very epic track. So that's a nice way. Like a lot of the albums we listen to, they just kind of end, right? Like they don't like have like a finale sort of plan, that kind of like progression. But this one does. Yeah. And that was really fun.
I think because we talked about this for the Late Night Lo-Fi, I think good albums in general, like the closer is so important to me. Like what's your last impression? And that one worked really well. But yeah, I think in general, like a lot of these just 4-minute tracks to just get in, have like a really cool synth or metal idea, explore it for a bit, and then transition into like another interesting idea and like another like 4-ish minute track. I just think like the pacing of the album is really good. But some stuff like track 2 is like an example of why I'm wondering, like, it's not like inhumanly fast, but it is. So it's so fast that I'm curious.
I would
bet it's programmed.
Yeah. There's probably a fair amount of programming, I would guess.
Which is cool. I mean, it's still its own thing. I'm just curious more than anything.
Yeah. So Dav Dralian actually has his own Wikipedia page, and he's a French dark synth artist, David, no last name, who worked on the band Pangora, and then just has quite a few singles and EPs out. But this is only his second album, or at least as Dralian.
Yeah, because I don't know if this is really technically a sequel album, but I think it's closely related to the previous one, Fall of Men, which is also very primal, assaulting.
Oh, you listen to that?
Well, I listened to like tracks here and there from the other ones because, like I said, I was trying to figure out like, is this them exploring one genre?
Oh, okay.
And the other stuff is more like my personal preconceived notions of what Darksynth is, which is just like, synthwave, but different timbres, Yeah. It's not, a lot of the other stuff is some of it's that and some of it's like this, like Fall of Man is similar and came out like the year before. So I think they're slightly connected.
Interesting. Yeah. That's something we'll have to look into, perhaps. Or the listeners, if you have a better understanding of Dav Dralian, let us know in the comments. That is from track 10, Near Dark, off our second album,
Zytel Systems, System 1 Horror by Makeup and Vanity Set. And I picked this because I was just digging through Darksynth, Horrorsynth compilations. And I came across one that I should have bookmarked, but I didn't. I'm a monster. That had a bunch from this artist from this album that were all named after horror movies, right? Near Dark is the classic Bill Paxton vampire movie. A very good one. Very fun.
Directed by Catherine Bigelow, I believe.
That's right. Yeah, it's early Catherine Bigelow. I think it's just before Point Break. Lance Henriksen, classic.
Oh, yeah. 100% the aesthetic of like Vampire the Masquerade, the role-playing game, was like a little bit, heavily, I think heavily influenced by Near Dark. Like, I think, in fact, that like in one of the vampire books, they trace Bill Paxton's character in the bar, that iconic shot, and use it in one of the books. Like,
yeah. That makes sense. Anyway, sorry. So I just noticed all these tracks that are named after. I was like, I know these are all movies. What is this? And I came across this album, and the album is a really cool premise where it was basically a song a day for the entire month of October 2017, each one influenced by a movie. But what I didn't know is I was actually picking a very prolific and big artist who, due to my own ignorance of the genre, I had no idea who they were. And I felt very silly when I saw all the stuff they had worked on, because I just went to Google the name and I was like, Makeup and Vanity Set. That's going to be the worst SEO possible. And then it actually came up. I was like, oh, heck. And looked into it and I was like, oh, they have an IMDb and all this stuff. So, yeah. So it's a musician out of Nashville, Matthew Stephen Pusty, who does a ton of stuff. It's all synth driven, but he has a huge and varied career. There's personal work, which I think like this album counts, and a few others on Bandcamp. Ton of soundtracks. So probably one of the biggest for our group is he did the soundtrack. There's a Batman documentary called Heart of Batman on a recent animated series Blu-ray, and he did like the score for that, the soundtrack for that. And that's on his Bandcamp. A lot of like true crime podcast soundtracks, a lot of movie soundtracks. So like this Steven Soderbergh produced movie. He did additional music for Godzilla vs. Kong, Watchmen, the series, the David Lindelof series. Did the Cybertruck ad campaign music, which is Outrun E, because they were trying to go for that vibe. So a perfect artist for it. But I thought that was funny scrolling through a recent portfolio on their website, because they're like a big professional musician.
Damn. I've been aware of Makeup and Vanity Set for years now, because I got years ago, he did the soundtrack for a video game called Brigador. And I don't know if you know this game, but it's like a cyberpunk game where you control a little mech. You can build your mech, but it's done like in an isometric view. So kind of like Super Nintendo games like Desert Storm or something like that, except you're driving a mech instead of a helicopter. And you have to go around and blow up all the enemies, but the levels are huge. So it's a very hard game, at least it was for me. So I liked the game in theory, but it was just like, oh God, I killed 50 out of 100 enemies and I have to start over because it got blown up. But I love the soundtrack for it. So I looked up the artist, like, oh my God, this is cool. So I started following him for a while, but I kind of like drifted off because I stopped listening to synthwave as much and Darksynth. But I was like, hey, I recognize that name. Great, let's see what he's up to. He's like, oh God, this is a lot of music. But yeah, Brigador, fun, but very hard.
No, I'm not familiar with the game, but it sounds good.
Yeah.
But this album, back to the album proper on our album review show, because it's easy to get distracted. I thought this album was a lot of fun to listen to. And that's because I love all of the references and the influences and the range explored on it. So like I said, it's 31 tracks. They say one track per day for the entire month, but I think the last two are Laurie Part 1 and Part 2, which I'm assuming is a reference to Laurie Strode, which is Jamie Lee Curtis's character in the Halloween series.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I don't think there's a horror movie called Laurie. I could be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, all the others are like well-known movies, at least to horror fans, right?
Yeah. I mean, this album has value on its own, just as like, here's a good watch list if you don't know what to do
for Halloween.
One Halloween or 1 October. Yeah. Like if you and some friends or whatever will be like, let's watch one horror movie. Although one is ambiguous. The Wicker Man, watch the original.
Oh yeah.
Watch the original Wicker Man. Don't watch the Nick Cage Wicker Man.
Well, I mean, the Nick Cage movie is a great comedy. All right. I'll say that.
It's a fantastic comedy, but I'm going to say for the purposes of this exercise, we're going original Wicker Man. And I think a lot of stuff does such a good job of capturing that feel.
Mm-hmm.
So some tracks from like a musical impressions that stood out to me is like probably the first one was track 8, Halloween 4, which is such a nice homage to Carpenter.
Yeah.
Does a really good job of that, like minimalist, like being minimalist, that just he loves that, just like boom, 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 like just pulsing, locked in bass.
Mm-hmm.
Very straightforward melodies on top of it. Very appropriate as a Carpenter reference.
Mm-hmm.
Videodrome, The Visitor is another great track. Overall, I just really enjoyed like the variety across this album.
Yeah, no, I quite enjoyed it too. Like a lot of the tracks do have samples from the movies that they're titled after,
Yes.
right? Which is a neat little touch. But what I was surprised with was that a lot of the tracks, well, you know, a lot of these movies have iconic soundtracks, right? Like Halloween, The Thing,
Friday the 13th.
Oh yeah. What was interesting was that like Makeup and Bandits that like referenced or homaged it, but like in a real interest, it wasn't just like I'm remixing this track, right? Like it wasn't a lazy, simple thing. Like Friday the 13th, you know, one of those very iconic tracks becomes almost kind of like a danceable take on the theme. Like there are a lot of like kind of like club, like there's a lot of interesting like choices on this album in terms of what is available. Like the Wicker Man track you sound like is almost like it's so like orchestral strings, like this really brutal scratching on wood sounds. It doesn't even have that many synth elements into it, which makes sense because The Wicker Man is like a folk horror movie. Like it's a very analog kind of movie. Like there's not much in the way of digital things. So there's a lot of variation, a lot of really cool ideas of playing on like both the music for the movies and the ideas of the movies. So yeah, he was like a lot of experimentation, but I think they all really work. I think one of my favorite tracks is like track 7, the Train to Busan. I think like heavy, like maybe double bass strings. I don't know, like a little sample of the sounds of fighting from the movie, like very intense shit. So yeah, very cool.
To your point about working within movies and their influences and the like, I also think there are some that are like in the other direction where I'm like, I don't even know what you would do for that. So the one that stood out to me the most is quite frankly track 13, The Langoliers, which The Langoliers is peak early to mid 90s Stephen King adaptation for TV.
Yeah.
Where this is, I guess, was this inspired by like, you know, it was very popular and The Stand did very well, where they were just like pumping all of his stuff out. If it's like one of these books where it's 1,100 pages of nonsense, just turned it into like a 3-part, 2 to 4 part miniseries, basically.
Yeah, this is also the peak of like made for TV movies as like a big event to keep the ratings up, right? Like this is before prestige TV and everything. So
that's true. Yeah, you got to keep eyes on. But that one is actually so far from what I remember that soundtrack, and I need to go dig into that soundtrack deeper, but it's much closer to his style, very, very synthwave. But I at least listened to the main theme for The Langoliers, and it's very just like mid 90s generic orchestrated score.
Yeah.
So I would love to know where some of this is coming from. If there's just parts I don't remember, or if they're really just, going for it on their own or whatever. But The Langoliers, great cheesy 90s straight to TV. Side unrelated shout out, The Langoliers also spawned one of my favorite things the last few years we've watched, which is Timekeepers of Eternity.
Hell yeah.
Where somebody took The Langoliers, which is on its own like 3 or 4 hours because it's 2 parts. It's like 2 made for TV movies basically, and cut it down to like an hour and made it like folded paper art for all the special effects and stuff instead of and it's a beautiful example of mixed media.
Yeah. It's like they took screen shots, printed them out on a black and white printer, and then like stop motion animated them. And they did really cool things with like using paper as the medium, right? Like tearing and folding and or like
crumpling them up to make the Langoliers, because the Langoliers are these little spoilers for a 30-year-old made for TV movie. There's little black voids of destruction. So they're like crumpled up paper and stuff. And it's very funny to me, but also amazing. Yeah. It's legitimately like amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's so much work.
Yeah. No shit.
Sorry, I was worried this would happen with this album. I'm just going to talk about what I like about each of the movies.
Oh, sure. And the soundtrack for that would be nothing. So that's interesting. Yeah, I was talking about the ones that were obviously referencing or homaging the original. And then there's ones that like they have no soundtrack that you would remember. It's just the most generic shit. And like what he does with that is interesting too. You know, there are like obviously the movies that he references that are like Italian horror films or Giallo. Like obviously those sound like appropriate soundtracks for the time. But like, there's some really interesting surprises. Like track 22 Hellraiser is like another EDM kind of like, let's fuck people up with some flesh hooks, man. This like that would fit in Hotline Miami.
Fleshry,
yeah. Like Fleshline Miami.
That's exciting.
Yeah, kind of want to see that. So yeah, and there's just a lot of really cool musical ideas in this. Like this is very like this is all synth. There's no metal. So if you just want if you wanted like horror movie Darksynth to listen to, like this is the track. Like if you're not a fan of metal or that brutal shredding sound, this is the album to get for your Halloween parties. Like this would be good for a Halloween party too, because like the occasional movie samples people would pick up on and be like, what was that? You know.
So just real quick before we go, one other thing I liked about this, I'm going to play a quick sample from is Laurie Part 1. This is about 4 minutes into the track. This highlights kind of the other thing I really liked about this track in terms of variety, and that there's actually a lot of like real instrumentation too. And I don't know if he's playing all of them. I mean, he might be proficient enough in a bunch of instruments. So he went to like an actual music conservatory, which I think he's actually went to some fancy music school. You know, at least be passable enough to play all this, because there's, you know, instruments used. There's a bunch of synths, and there's also like a Telecaster, a Fender jazz bass. So there's played instruments, and I don't know if he's playing them or others, but I thought those were nice little touches against the synth backdrop. So I went with this piece from Laurie. A little bit of a recency bias because it's towards the end of the album. So as I was thinking about back to like, what do I want to sample? That was a nice part. But also like it comes up in track 2. There's like a lot of like keys and drums and not just all synth. Again, just speaking to the range of work and inspiration that went into the album. So really great Halloween party album, really great Halloween watch list. Thank you so much for listening. It was really fun to dig into a new genre. Always like to learn more. And we're going to continue our Horrorsynth education indirectly by moving into soundtracks for Giallo. Technically, I think is what I'm going to look for, but just any kind of horror movie soundtracks that don't exist, going for that haunted media vibe that we like to do here. So, for example, there's a nice Bandcamp collection of some albums. I'm going to do some research and figure out, because I love media about media that doesn't exist. It's like one of my favorite things. And I feel like we haven't done any in a while.
It's true.
So it's good, you know, both theming for the month and also just something I generally enjoy. It also ties well into, you know, some research, because our October Patreon bonus episode, you know, normally talk about, is going to also be, I think, on Italian horror, because it's a very influential for me, and I really, really like it. So talk about that in general. So if you want to hear that and 30 some other bonus episodes, we have a Patreon at Nightclerk Radio at patreon.com. Bonus episodes, Discord, maybe some other content. So it's good if you want to help keep the antenna on. You can also find us on pretty much any social media. I don't know what the current list these days to introduce, but we're Nightclerk Radio at Blue Sky. I'm going to say that first. You're still using Twitter, Nightclerk Radio on Twitter. I'm at Burke McBurkinson. Ross is at Ross Payton. I think you're also Ross Payton on Blue Sky.
Yeah.
You're pretty consistent. Also, Nightclerk Radio, I think anywhere else you want to look for us, websites, Facebooks, etc. MySpace. We should set up a MySpace. We should bring it back. We talked about it this episode.
Oh, yeah.
We should start Nightclerk Radio MySpace.
Mm-hmm.
My 8 friends can be artists that have subtweeted us because they don't like our reviews.
Yeah.
And then we can have like the music for the landing be, I don't know, samples. We got to mellow music. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm excited. I got totally distracted thinking about a Nightclerk Radio MySpace.
Haunted social media. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah, bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, wherever you do choose to check this out, if you could take a moment to rate, review, comment, click a button, that's really great. It helps the algorithm know to point other people in our direction. But the thing we always advocate, and more importantly, is like build community, which I've really been appreciating over the last few months, both trying to be not very good at, more involved in our Discord and some other Vaporwave Discords. There's a lot of cool people in this community. And, outside of this community, you should talk to people about what you like, share your interests, build bridges. Don't have to be in your little isolated identity bubbles. You can talk to other people about other stuff. And hopefully that other stuff is both us and killer Horrosynth soundtracks. So thank you so much again for your support, and we'll chat you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.